Hello, hello, hello. My name is Linda G. Robert. I'm your Back in the Groove Again coach, and I'm actually on Zoom, streaming live on YouTube. This is the first time I'm trying this out, so I hope it works perfectly. Oh, I can hear feedback, so that's not good. All right, so there we go. So a bit of a learning curve there. I am live on Zoom, but I was also listening to myself, some feedback. Now, over the last few weeks, I've been talking a lot about personal things. I've talked about my marriages and my divorces. I've talked about my use of pot to be able to, live on life's terms, or when I wasn't able to live on life's terms. And I also talked about my adulterous behaviors when I was married. So really challenging things to talk about. In fact, if I'd be the person that I was back then, I would not have talked about it openly or as openly as I did over the last few videos. But this particular live is all about some things that I did to be able to move forward, gradually move forward. Because, as anything else, change doesn't happen overnight. And I know this sounds a bit cliche, but it really doesn't. And it really does depend on what you want to change. So I'm going to talk in general terms here of some of the things that I had to do, or that I did do, to manage this change and to eventually become, the person that I am today. I think the very first thing, and it might not be in logical order, but this thing is the very first thing. The first thing that I had to do was to be willing to get help, to be willing to talk about it to someone else. In my case, I talked to a friend. I talked to a friend about my drinking habits. And she asked me pointed questions, and I answered her. So without this willingness to get help, to seek help, I would not have been able to get help. I'll talk about willingness in just a few more minutes here. So to seek help from friends, to seek help from counselors. Now, I know a lot of people don't want to go to counselors because they think that if they go to a counselor, that means that they're sick or that there's something wrong with them. It doesn't mean that. When I went to a counselor, I went to a counselor quite a few times. I'll tell you about the first time that I went to a counselor. It didn't work for me because at that time I wasn't willing to look at myself and willing to make changes. This was for the third husband. When he and I were married, he wanted to get counseling. He wanted us to get counseling. So he was definitely open and willing to get the counseling. But I felt that I needed to satisfy his desire. So when I did go to counseling with him, it didn't work for me for different reasons. Number one, I didn't think I needed that. I knew what my issue was. I just wasn't prepared to do it. I knew that I wasn't in love with him, that I couldn't commit with him, but I just wasn't ready to do something about it, right? The fear was preventing me from really, moving on. So I did go through some counseling, but I wasn't open and receptive at that time. But, it was the willingness to please my partner at that time. That was the reason I went for counseling. But later on, I got some counseling because I knew I needed to make changes, and I wanted to make changes. That was my decision. The motivation was more internal, intrinsic, right? So that belonged to me. That was my motivation, not because somebody else wanted. So this is something to consider, right? If you're going to get help, it's so important to make sure it's because you want to get help, right? You want that help. So willingness, seeking help from counselors or taking a program. In my case, I did take a couple of programs. So be willing to listen and to get that help. Now, just a little bit more about willingness. It starts with an overall willingness, an overall desire to change, an overall willingness to make small changes or to identify patterns, a willingness to identify patterns, a willingness to do things differently, willingness to take time off. In my case, I knew that I needed to go on a sick leave. You'll have to listen to some of my prior videos when I talked about that with the addictions piece there, the addictions video. I knew that I needed to make changes, but I had to be willing to take time off. I took 2 weeks off in this particular case. Needed to be willing to do that in order to go out of town. In my case, I had to go out of town and participate in a program. But if I didn't want to take time off, I would have had to be willing to work on these particular things more on my own or with a counselor. So I had to be willing to say, okay, I'm going to take time off. And that's not always easy to do, right? Depending on how we get paid at work, it might not always be possible, but sometimes it's very necessary to do that. I also needed to be honest, completely honest. And that is not easy to do. It means really to really look deep in terms of what I want, and be honest about how I feel, about my feelings. I needed to also, be honest about how I felt about them, how I felt about, and this could be friends, it could be, the family members, it could be spouses. But in my case, I needed to be honest about how I really, really felt, and honest about what I needed to do as well. So not always something that's easy to do. That's why you get help. That's why you get help from a counselor or you get help from a coach, for example. I also needed to start setting boundaries. Boundaries, people, places, and things. I needed to recognize what good people was, what it was to have good people around, how I felt around good people, how I felt around people that weren't good influences. And I needed to set boundaries around what I wanted and what I didn't want. So setting boundaries was very, very important as well. In other words, when I stopped smoking pot, I needed to be aware of the types of environment that would influence me. And I needed to set some boundaries around that. So when I mentioned in one of the videos that I stopped smoking pot about 11, 12 years ago now, and I stopped seeing that boy, that man that I say boy because he always said he was a boy, but he was in fact a man. I stopped seeing him. I set a boundary. It was a boundary for me to not see him and to surround myself more with, positive-minded people. So setting boundaries was really important. It's also important to recognize the clues when someone isn't good and to recognize that change is a process. So let's talk a little bit about recognizing the clues. When I was sitting on the couch that night that I decided that's it, I'm leaving. There had been clues along the way, little whispers, especially, well, maybe more than whispers. I remember there were some times that I had smoked too much or whatever I had smoked really knocked me out. And of course, at that time, there weren't no clues. My mind wasn't functioning properly at all. It was afterwards when I started thinking about the waste of time that I actually spent sleeping or snoozing or not having the energy. Those clues were very subtle, but they were voices, really quiet voices that were telling me to not do this or to leave a situation. There was a time quite a few years ago, and I don't remember if I shared that I was in my boyfriend's apartment. I was with him and another couple, and there was a tiny voice that kept whispering to me, "You need to go, you need to go." And I didn't pay attention to that voice initially, but it kept it kept telling me to go. And so I noticed that when I wasn't paying attention to that voice, that I was starting to feel uncomfortable, because I was actually uncomfortable being there at that time. So I finally, and this was the same night, I finally did start paying attention to that voice. So recognizing when the environment, isn't good. There are always little voices that tell you. There are always little voices, tiny voices. They might be so quiet that you don't hear them, but eventually they become louder and louder. And so recognizing those clues, right, when someone isn't good, and also to recognize and to acknowledge that change is a process. So I went through a lot of different changes, lots, lots of different changes. And I have to say that even now, I'm still going through some changes. My life isn't perfect, but I recognize it more. It doesn't mean I'm going to act on it and change right away. No, but I recognize it more. I'm more aware of it now. At the time, it was almost like I wasn't paying attention to my life. But I now live a much more, I live with a much more awareness now. I am in tuned more, and that took a lot of time to be more in tuned with the environment, or in tune with the people that were around me. I also started using a journal. I journaled for the longest time. Oh, when I was really pissed off, I journaled. Man, the things that I wrote in that journal, the things that, when I read back, because I did keep my journals for the longest time, when I was reading back, I started noticing how angry I was. Some of the language that I was using and the swears that I was using. But that was okay, because that's what I needed to do. I really needed to vent. And I didn't always have people around that gave me that freedom to vent. So I had to use a journal. I journaled a lot about different things. I also wrote letters of forgiveness to me, and letters of forgiveness to other people. My husband's, for example. I didn't send them the letter. That was a choice. I didn't always send letters, but I did write letters to my kids, and I read those letters. So, that becomes a choice. I wrote different types of letters, and some of them I shared with people that really mattered, like my kids. But some of them I didn't share, but that still needed to be written. Those letters still needed to be written, whether they were letters of forgiveness or letters of my truth towards these people, towards these men, for example. If I was talking about my husbands, they needed to be written. Again, it's almost like a journaling, but you're getting your emotions, your voice out. I didn't share those letters. I didn't need to. I didn't have to share those letters. I also wrote letters of love letters to me. Dear Linda, and I shared that in other videos. Dear Linda, you are such a wonderful, caring person. And I know that because you're always there for your kids, or you're always there for your friends. I wrote letters. This is just an example. But I wrote a couple of letters that I did mail to me as well. Remember the postal system where you put a stamp on things? was actually something I did do. And it was really interesting when I read the letter, because of course those letters got mailed. And I read those letters afterwards, and it was like, wow, I felt love. I felt compassion. It was a really interesting process. There's a couple of more things that I want to share with you on this live right now. And I don't know, it's hard to tell if anybody's watching, because I had to pause my video. I was hearing the feedback. So I'm just going to share a couple of things. And if you are watching this on the live, please do add your comments. But also, if you're watching this on the recorded version afterwards, please add your comments, add your questions, add some of the things that worked for you, that helped you to move forward. So a couple of things. I needed to also have the desire to learn other skills. Skills such as dating skills. Now, I have to say that's still a work in process, because I don't feel comfortable asking someone out for a date. I don't know if I'll ever feel comfortable, asking someone out for a date. But I needed to learn what dating was, because I used to not date. I used to go out to the bar, have drinks, and get picked up or pick someone up. That's not dating. So that's an example of a skill, right? How to date, how to set boundaries around a date. Those are skills that I needed to learn. And I did learn them. So to have that desire to learn skills, communication skills, for example, or examples, right? Self-care. I could add self-care as a skill, right? So the desire to learn other skills. And also, I needed to validate my feelings. When I was upset, when I was sad, when I was mad, whatever those feelings were, or those emotions that I was expressing or feeling, I needed to validate them. I needed to say it was okay. It was okay. And the journal helped to do that as well. So journaling and validating, I'm upset right now. I'm really upset. I'm really pissed off right now. It's okay. It's okay to express that. And it's okay to validate that. Oftentimes when we are with good friends, that's what we want. We want validation. We want to know that what we are saying is okay, because sometimes we doubt. So if you are going to talk with somebody, choose the right person to talk to. Choose the right friend to talk to someone who will understand, and someone who will listen, and someone who will validate your feelings. That requires practice, right? Validating someone else's feelings does require practice and requires skills as well. So not everyone can do that. So you might just want to say to that person, I just want to talk right now. I just want to vent, and I need you to listen and to not say anything, please. Is that something that you can do, or that you're willing to do? And then you can just start just talking. The last thing that I want to say too is you need to celebrate when things are going great. We don't often say, good job. Oh, I'm so glad I said that, or I'm so glad I did that. Anything. You need to celebrate when things are going well. So, even though the period itself might not be the best period, sometimes when we go through a divorce, well, not sometimes, usually when we go through a divorce, it's not fun. It's not easy. But during that process, there are some good moments that you need to recognize, those good moments, and you need to kind of celebrate. And celebrate doesn't mean, woohoo, let's party. No, I simply mean to say, you know what, Linda, you're doing good. This is a great day. You've written a lot on the journal, and you can express yourself. So it's validating how you feel. And celebrating can mean, you know what, I deserve a good cup of coffee. So I'm going to go to my favorite coffee shop. So celebrate, there's different ways of celebrating, but I do think that it's important to celebrate when you know that you're doing well. The last thing, there's one more thing that I did want to share, and it's to learn to tame that voice, the critical voice, that inner gremlin. When I was drinking and picking up those men, I knew I always sabotaged. I knew I was sabotaging because I can hear those voices saying, "You did it again. You did it again. Why can't you learn? Why can't you blah, blah, blah?" Right? So those inner gremlins need to be tamed. So I might say, those words, for example, "Oh, you're so crazy. Why'd you do that again?" And it's to become aware. Mindfulness helps with that. Mindfulness helps to be aware of those thoughts. And once you're aware of those terrible voices, we might stop saying that by saying, "That's enough. Stop that." And then flip it around. You are a good person. I am a good person. I am the best person that I can be right now. So practicing mindfulness is another thing that I want to add, because I've practiced mindfulness meditation now for many years. And the more I practice, the more I realize that I do have these voices, and sometimes I just ignore them. I don't pay attention to them. Or when I do pay attention to those voices, it's not for long anymore, because I learned to recognize the voice and to put a stop to it, or to turn it around. So that's what I want to share with you. When we talk about things that aren't pleasant, sometimes it's very, very challenging. But there are different things that we can do to move on and move forward. And you want to start with just one thing, So if you are listening and you do have things to do, to change, maybe you have a lot of things to change, choose one thing, not something complicated, because you want to succeed. So what is that one thing, simple thing, that you need to do today to move forward? And maybe it's journaling. Maybe that's what you need to do today. Maybe it's talking to a friend just to get things off your chest. Whatever that thing is, it's the next best thing to do, because there are probably lots of things you can do. But, you don't want to do lots of things. You just simply want to do one thing, the next best thing to do. And then after you've done that, notice how that feels to do that one thing. It might feel uncomfortable, especially if you're not used to doing that. So acknowledge that this was uncomfortable. This was an uncomfortable thing for me to do, but I'm really glad I did it. Or this was uncomfortable for me to do. Perhaps I'll talk to someone else the next time, right? So you might need to take a little step back after that and acknowledge what it was like for you. But that doesn't mean giving up. So maybe things can be uncomfortable, but it doesn't mean that's it. I'll never do that again. That's what working with coaches help you. Because you can have a safe place to talk to, but the coach will also encourage you to try again, to try something else, to be okay with that feeling of being uncomfortable, because those feelings come and go. They don't last forever. They don't last forever. So this is Linda G. Robert, your Back in the Groove Again coach, helping you live your best life right now so you can love what you do. I finished my series. This is the last part of that particular series. I certainly hope that you've learned something from it. And if you didn't, and if you did experience something that's similar, please share that in the comments section. I would love to hear your feedback. And of course, I certainly appreciate you watching my videos, watching my lives. And please subscribe to my YouTube channel if this is the first time you hear me talk. You can also go to my website, lindagrobert.com. And if you want to talk, if you want to chat, if you want some coaching around something, send me an email and we'll talk more about that. You can find some information on my website. All right, so that's it for today.